Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth, and we have a great broadcast lined up today. And we are all over the country. We're taking our act out to the west, out in Utah. And we want to welcome Jake Hatch to the broadcast. Welcome aboard, Jake.
Thanks for having me, guys. How are you?
Oh, doing great.
It's always a great night when we get to talk about football. So
yeah, no doubt about that. There's no complaints here.
And Steve Balestrieri, my co-host, is also on the broadcast, giving you the old salute. Then again, what do you want? He's a veteran out there, so give him the old salute. We'll give a salute to everybody out there that's going to listen to this broadcast because they're going to get a lot out of it. And Jake, why don't you go ahead and lead off and let everybody know what you do and how they're going to find you first, and then we're going to get to the broadcast at hand.
Absolutely. So I'm a radio producer and reporter out here for the Zone Sports Network in Salt Lake City. We're the Utah Jazz affiliate. We're their flagship station. So I produce our morning drive show out here. In addition to that, I cover BYU for my station. I host a podcast called Locked On Cougars, covering BYU every single day and just having a lot of fun in the meantime. So if people want to follow me on Twitter, you can find me at Jacob C. Hatch. It's my given name, and love talking, love banter on social media. So if you guys want to reach out, feel free to.
There you go. And Steve?
Yeah, I write for PatsFans.com. I'm on Twitter as well. In fact, I'm doing a Locked On Patriots. It must be all part of the same network. So I'm doing a Locked On Patriots show on Friday morning after the first round. So a good buddy of mine, Mike Diabate, runs that. And he does a great job with that. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the usual suspects. But I also write about the military. That's why I was late arriving tonight because there's a big military story getting ready to break. So, but that's a story for another time.
I'm locked in with you guys here on the Sports Exchange. Just to let people know a little bit about me. Also, I'm planning to cover the Miami Dolphins draft party. I just got notified that I'll be able to get out there. So I have no idea.
Awesome.
I have no idea what I'm getting into, except so we'll let the theory of the unknown lead me to some more dialogue and banter later on when we go ahead and hopefully do this again down the line. But meanwhile, obviously, I'm the CEO of the South Florida Tribune. We certainly do a lot of broadcasting here, as well as an online publication, and let people know at the beginning of the broadcast that you can find me at Twitter at Tribune South, and of course I'm connected on Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as Instagram, although Twitter and Facebook are my bigger ones, and the LinkedIn I take a lot of value. So with that said, the theme of this broadcast really is originating from Utah because a guy that played there for 3 years, his name is Zach Wilson, and let's just hope that he has better results in the Big Apple than some of the previous quarterbacks out there. So, Jake, with that said, why don't you give everybody basically a summary or an overview of Zach Wilson's career?
So Zach's a very interesting character in that he had a meteoric rise up NFL draft charts. If you were to have asked me, let's say a year ago this time, saying, hey, Jake, so we're talking last April, hey, Jake, next year Zach Wilson's going to be a top 5 overall draft pick, I would have laughed you out of the room. It didn't seem possible. Obviously, we're dealing with COVID and everything going on, but this is a young man that he came up through the high school ranks here in Utah, played for one of the top prep programs in the state, but was pretty lightly recruited, all things considered. He was a Boise State commit before BYU entered the picture late and garnered his signature. Funny enough, many people out there probably know, but if they don't, we've got a fierce rivalry out here between the University of Utah and BYU. Well, Zach grew up the son of a Utah player, was a diehard Utah fan, season tickets to Utah Utes football, the whole gamut, but decided, you know what, BYU is where I'm going to go play. Went down to Provo and started midway through his true freshman year, took over for a senior quarterback, had a good finish to that season. His second year, though, as a sophomore, he had shoulder surgery during the offseason, really was slowing his preparation for that season for 2019. And then midway through that year, broke his thumb in a game against Toledo. He missed 4 games, if I recall correctly, before coming back, but he was not fully healthy the rest of the way. struggled through that season. There were a lot of people who had a lot of doubts about him. The coaching staff made it very clear going into the 2020 offseason that the job was going to be open. There were going to be other guys who were going to be competing for that job with Zach, and he beat them all out. And obviously we saw what he did during 2020, that incredible run that BYU had going 11-1. Scott, you and I were at that Boca Raton Bowl, watching him tear up UCF. Just a pretty marvelous season all the way around. And this is a young man. I think the biggest thing that people need to know about Zach is he is motivated unlike many other people I have ever met. He wears a wristband. He wears it every day. It says, "Prove them wrong." And that's what he does every day. He goes out to try and prove people wrong. He was a 3-star prospect coming out of high school. There were a lot of people who said he'd never be a starting quarterback at the collegiate level. And all of a sudden now he's a potential number 2 overall pick in the NFL draft. It's just an incredible, incredible story.
Well, amazingly enough, when you talk about 2019, and I'm looking at his numbers right now, he plays a 9 games started, and I'm going to go over the line here. Okay, he threw 247. He completed 247 passes, 336 attempts. But I think the thing is, when we look at 2019, I want to go to 2019 first, and then we'll get to the 2020 because I think that's where we were going here with the other numbers. But in 2019, plays in 9 games, completes 199 of 319 for 2,382 yards versus 11 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. Now we'll go to the 2020 numbers to show you what a marked improvement, as you just illustrated. 12 games, 247 completions, 336 attempts, complete 73.5% of his passes for 3,692 yards with 33 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. My goodness. And when we go ahead and talk about those numbers, okay, he also rushes for 255 yards and 10 touchdowns. He broke Steve Young's completion percentage mark with that 73.5%. And let's go ahead and reiterate what you talked about, that Boca Raton Bowl. And that's this. He completes, 26 of 34 passes for 425 yards and 3 touchdowns. As the old legendary broadcaster Keith Jackson would say, was it a holy?
Whoa, Nelly.
Whoa, Nelly.
Yeah. I knew we got something here. Well, you can use every single announcer analogy, but Keith Jackson, I don't know. I think of all these legendaries that have catchphrases. So we know that
very first Monday Night Football game.
Yeah, we know Harry Carey was known for holy cow. So who was the other reference I made?
Well, Keith Jackson was Whoa Nelly.
Whoa Nelly. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if he said anything else.
Oh, he had a few different ones. Trust me, Keith Jackson. That was the soundtrack to my childhood, watching him on ABC calling college football. So.
Oh yeah.
He's the GOAT in my mind. I know many people out there would say Howard Cosell for an older generation is their GOAT. Keith Jackson is the all-timer in my book.
Yeah, when it comes to college football, I loved Keith Jackson. And I remember the very, very first, I was just a youngster at the time, but the very first Monday Night Football game, the Jets and the Cleveland Browns. No one thought it was going to stick, and he did that one too.
Well, a guy that I remember growing up as a kid from the University of Michigan was Bill Fleming. I think you probably remember him.
I've heard the name, yes.
Yeah, Bill Fleming was pretty good, but well, when we put all these numbers in perspective, though, with Zach, last year's numbers alone, 3,692 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. You wouldn't think there'd be a quarterback competition leading up to it after those numbers. But
yeah. Well, see, and one thing about that, Scott, is he actually in that game against UCF, if you recall, you were there with me.
Right.
BYU called the dogs off before the fourth quarter. They could have poured it on had they wanted to in that game. They were just absolutely having their way with the Knights, and it could have been a lot worse. But that happened a lot during this past 2020 season for Zach. There were a lot of games where he was taken out either early in the fourth quarter or in the fourth quarter overall, just because BYU was up big. So his numbers, yes, they're absolutely astounding. But to think had he played full games the entire way through, could have been even better, in my opinion.
Well, when you think of the fact that he didn't play full games, at least he reduced his the probability for injury too.
Yeah.
So, I've seen a lot of great college quarterbacks throw for over 10,000 yards, but what did they turn out like when they got to the pros? So let's talk about the apparent destination, Zach. Okay, I know we talk about the BYU Cougars and the Boca Raton Bowl in the 2021 draft. And, of course, we all know what Steve Young did in his career. But what about the New York Jets? Do you think that that's a good fit in the Big Apple, knowing that every move that you make will be scrutinized all the way? I'll tell you, there has to be a culture shock coming from Utah all the way to New York.
Just a little bit. Yes, there will absolutely be a culture shock. Here's the thing. The Jets, they have such a tortured history, especially at the quarterback position. I did a podcast recently with some guys who cover the Jets out there, and the joke came up all the time that the last time the Jets had a bona fide quarterback in their mind was Joe Namath. So you got to go back 50 years to find a quarterback that most people would consider as a true franchise quarterback. It's going to be tough. There's no doubt about that. Zach's stepping into an absolute hornet's nest. Out here in Utah, we have 3 daily newspapers that covered him and BYU on a daily basis. If I'm not mistaken, New York has got 15, if not more, daily periodicals who will be covering the Jets. The fishbowl he is going to be in, like you said, Scott, is going to be absolutely incredible. Every move you make, especially as the Jets quarterback, is going to be scrutinized. It's going to be broken down. They're going to get into it. So I'm very curious how he handles it. I can tell you this much, knowing what I know of his family, he comes from a very successful family. He's got an uncle. Many of you probably know JetBlue Airlines. That's his uncle, was the founder of JetBlue Airlines. It's a very, very successful extended family that he comes from. And that's not to say his parents aren't successful. They're successful entrepreneurs in their own right. So this is a driven young man. But yeah, the beast that is the New York media is going to, I think, take some adjusting for a guy like Zach.
Oh, and it's in the fan base too. Like you said, they're very tortured. They haven't had a winner in 50 years. And, it's different than the Giants. Even though they play in the same house, the fan base is different. Being a Patriots guy, we see the Jets twice a year, and you deal with Jets fans all the time. And they're really tough on their players there. And they can sour on a guy really quickly. I mean, it doesn't take very much, because if he was to have one bad game, people up there would argue, they drafted another bust. He's another bust. It's going to be tough on him there. That's what my biggest question was. Him obviously better than we do. Does he have that mental makeup that he's going to be able to handle that?
I believe he does. And that just may be me reading too much into having covered him his entire career here at BYU and everything. But like I said before, he wears that wristband that says "prove them wrong." It's something he has worn. Utah was the school he dreamed of going to his entire life, and the Utes did not recruit him. And that was a big part of why he went to BYU in many respects, is he wanted to go prove to Utah that they made a mistake in not recruiting him and not giving him a scholarship offer. So this is a kid, like I said, who is driven. He's motivated. He's an absolute gym rat. And what I mean by that is he loves to watch film. I have talked to multiple coaches at BYU who said that he would send them texts at all hours of the night. We're talking 2 a.m. at some points saying, "Hey, coach, I saw this play on film. Do you think we can work this into what we're doing in our game plan, etc.?" He absolutely lives and breathes football, and I think that's actually going to help him because you mentioned the Jets fan base. They've had Sanchez, they've had Darnold, and they've turned on all of them very quickly. Right. He's going to have to make sure that he is ready to go right from the get-go, but I think he'll be ready.
Yeah, well, Robert Saleh is a new coach for the New York Jets, and I know him well. I don't know him personally, but I know that he was from Dearborn, Michigan area. So he's a real, strong-minded coach. And I think the biggest problem that Jets quarterbacks have had is you can't go ahead and keep flipping coaches every couple of years and offensive coordinators. I've seen a lot of quarterbacks that are considered bust become bust because of by not having a sufficient coaching staff. And I could get into, Steve and I are going to do that another guest down the road. But a quarterback is only as good as his coaching staff. It really is. And one of the reasons that Sam Darnold went downhill is you had Adam Gase there as well.
Now, I was going to say, the coach, Adam Gase, that dude, man, I wouldn't want to play for him if I were playing.
Well, at least you can say that Zach Wilson is getting out just in time. I have had so much admiration for the BYU program I have. When I think of the fact that, number one, I was glad they whipped the UCF Knights, because I'm a University of South Florida guy anyway, so we don't like the Knights. So and the fact that a school can proclaim itself as a national championship, we have to understand that this isn't Disney World, although they play near Disney World, to actually believe in that. Okay, so they look like Mickey Mouse thinking that. Then again, the situation will be in the right spot, so go figure. But let them think all they want. But the fact that you've had Jim McMahon, I love Jim McMahon, and worked out pretty well with the Bears. Yet the Bears have always had problems at the quarterback position, but Jim McMahon did win it. The one thing I used to love about Jim McMahon, and I know Steve can attest to it, is he'd wear those headbands, he'd make headlines. I like this analogy, guys. Make headlines for wearing headbands. And I'll never forget when he had Roselle on one of them, just to show Pete Roselle, but it was funny. But he did win a Super Bowl. And then you talk about Mark Wilson, another fine quarterback, really good quarterback. And we just alluded to Steve Young. So the history there to me with quarterbacks, and I really hope that he does turn out really, really, really well, because, again, you talk about a quarterback that did a dismantling job. But I think the thing I've been impressed so far is the improvement from 19 to 20.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about BYU's legendary quarterbacks, you can go back to Gifford Nielsen. Many of you might remember him playing for the Houston Oilers way back in the day. They had a run from the mid-1970s through Ty Detmer in the early 1990s that was just unparalleled in many ways in college football. You mentioned some of those great names: Mark Wilson, Jim McMahon, Steve Young, Robbie Bosco, Ty Detmer. There are so many of them that have come through, and Zach's kind of rebuilding that reputation as BYU being a quarterback factory. And you mentioned the noted improvement from 2019 to 2020. A lot of it had to do with having good health. He had a great offensive line this past year, absolutely incredible. His left tackle, Brady Christensen, figures to probably be a day 2 pick in the NFL draft this weekend. So there's a lot to like about Zach. There's a lot to like about his game, and I'm looking forward to seeing him in New York. It's going to be a different beast. There's no doubt about that with this team. But the improvement he showed from his sophomore to his true junior years from 2019 to 2020, I think that if you're a Jets fan or NFL fan overall, you got to think he's going to take another leap once he gets into a new system there in the NFL.
I was covering the Jacksonville Jaguars Chicago Bears game on December the 27th, and that's when Jacksonville, went ahead, more or less clinched the number one pick. And then you think, of course, we know they're going to take Trevor Lawrence. That's a given, and I like Trevor Lawrence. He's been a winner at Clemson, and and I think he'll do all right with Urban Meyer. I can't imagine they're going to get 7, 8, 9 wins right away. But I think for Jacksonville to win 5 or 6 games in the first year until they acclimate. But if Trevor Lawrence, wasn't number one, do you think that Zach Wilson would have been able to be the number 1 overall pick?
I think it'd be in the discussion. There's no doubt about that. We have heard, anybody who has watched or read anything about this year's draft has heard about the 5 quarterbacks who are reportedly going to go here, potentially in the top 10. Who knows how everything's going to shake out. But yeah, if there were no Trevor Lawrence and what Zach Wilson did in 2020, I think he'd absolutely be in the mix for the top overall pick. There have been reports out here that the Jacksonville Jaguars did do their due diligence with Wilson and met with him multiple times via Zoom. And obviously they're just kind of making sure that they have all their bases covered. So Trevor Lawrence, once in a generation player, it seems like. The size, the skill, the mobility, the arm, you got to take him. But had he not been on the board or whatever, for whatever reason, I think absolutely Zach Wilson would be in the mix for the top overall pick.
It's funny. You mentioned a couple of things about Zach, and it reminded me of somebody else because he's carrying that chip, well, not on his shoulder, on his wrist. When you mentioned, that thing proved them wrong, and how he's a film rat. And, it reminds me of a guy that played in New England for 20 years. He still carries that chip on his shoulder, having covered him down there. You see it. We saw it every day in practice. And Rodney Harrison, when he came to the Patriots, he said, well, Tom was legendary about being the first one in the door. So Rodney comes in at 5:30. Tom's already in the gym working out. So the next day he comes in at 5:00. Tom's already in the gym working out. And he said, I came in the third day at like 4:45. Tom's already in the film room, and he said, I'm not coming here at 4:30. You can hang it up. So, and Brady just looked at him and smiled and said, that's the only way we win, baby. And Harrison said right then, I knew I had made the right decision in coming to the Patriots. And that's the kind of attitude he's going to have. It sounds like he already has it. So that's a big thing in my book, is because, a lot of these guys have that talent. And then, once they get into the pros, some of them lack that, I don't want to say work ethic, but that drive to go take that next step to be great.
Oh, no, absolutely. And Wilson, there's a funny thing about him is growing up, he actually thought for a long time he was going to play collegiate basketball. This is a kid who's a really good athlete. He played AAU basketball from the time he was a youngster. Football wasn't necessarily where he thought he was going to make his hay, but when he got into high school and really started discovering that he had a knack, an ability to throw the football, worked in the offense that his coach had developed. His high school coach is a guy named Eric Kerr out here in Utah, and he's a legend in the prep ranks around here just due to his offensive acumen. He's got a legendary offensive pedigree with quarterbacks who have gone on to the college game, but Zach is going to be, I think, the greatest of all of them, obviously, going number 2 overall in the draft. So this is a kid who, yes, basketball was essentially his first love. He thought that basketball was going to be his ticket to go to college, to get a scholarship, but then he discovered football was an opportunity for him. And he has stated on multiple occasions to us in the media out here that football has just become his life, and he loves it. He eats, breathes, sleeps football. That's what he's dedicated to, and he is dedicated to becoming the best. He's actually mentioned that guys like Tom Brady are idols for him, guys that he's kind of tried to model himself after. Who knows how things are going to shake out? Because like you said, where he's going to the Jets, the Patriots. Well, even when Tom took over the Patriots, they were a middling franchise, but then led him on the greatest 20-year run in NFL history, in my opinion. And just it's pretty cool to kind of see the parallels and see what Zach might be able to do. But he's got a lot to prove, and it all starts with this draft.
Amazingly enough, when I think of Sam Darnold, and we knew he would get traded, but before the Jets moved him, I would have been interested to see a competition between Sam Darnold and Zach Wilson in camp. I would have been, but we know that never happened. And I tell you what, you talk about that saying, prove them wrong. Sam Darnold's got that. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a headband and take that same prove them wrong and let the Jets know they made a mistake by not sticking with them with a new coaching regime. And I actually think that Sam Darnold's going to do all right with the Carolina Panthers. He won't have the media attention that he has to deal with in New York as well. So, I just love the fact prove them wrong to me is something that we have a couple of quarterbacks that are on a mission to do, that have a chip on their shoulder that really are connected.
Yeah, I love it when they have that. I mean, because I think that drives them. It drives them to be better. Mm-hmm. And I really liked Sam Darnold coming out. I thought he had all the tools to be a really, really good NFL quarterback. I just think he was put in a really bad situation. And then with the new regime coming in, he wasn't their guy. Right. And like you said, I think he's going to do well in Carolina. I really do. A fresh start with a new team. He's not going to be in the glaring spotlight of New York. And we all know how that can be, especially with the media there. They'll love you on week 1. And then by week 3, they're calling for your neck. So, it's going to be tough for him. But like, Jake was just saying, I think that, it sounds like he has that makeup that he'd be able to handle that. And I think it's going to be important for, the new coaching staff to kind of shield him a little bit, at least in his rookie season, because the expectations are going to be through the roof for this kid. I mean, he's going to be the number 2 pick.
Yeah.
And, people are going to expect him to go out there and be Aaron Rodgers on week 1. And It doesn't happen that way. It rarely ever happens. So they need to be patient with them, and I think the coaching staff really has to play a big part in that.
Well, Sam Darnold was number 3, and I thought if there was a landing spot he could have gone to, I thought about the Seattle Seahawks where you had Pete Carroll out there. But obviously, the Carolina Panthers made an offer they couldn't refuse. So when we look at Sam Darnold, let's talk about the 2020 quarterback class. 3 guys that come to mind are Joe Burrow, Tua Tagovailoa, and Justin Herbert. And all of these 3 guys figure to work out if you're one any indication. So, Jake, why don't you try to go ahead? I hate to compare, but I'm going to ask you to try to do it anyway. Compare your guy, Zach Wilson, to Joe Burrow first, Tua Tagovailoa, Justin Herbert, then Steve and I will chime in.
Well, honestly, the best comp, if you're going to go between those 3 quarterbacks, it is Joe Burrow. And the reason why is because Burrow had a similar leap from what was his junior to senior years with LSU that Zach had from his sophomore to his junior years. They're different types of quarterbacks. BYU relied on Zach to really throw the ball down the field. And that's not to say that Joe Burrow didn't throw down the field with LSU, but Joe Burrow's just a different type of quarterback overall. I think Zach's got a bigger arm than Joe overall, both plenty capable of making the throws that they need to. But I see a lot of the kind of meteoric rise that Zach had this past draft cycle that you saw with Joe Burrow. Because I think many people saw, okay, kind of pedestrian numbers as a junior there at LSU, and then just has maybe the best individual season in college football history, wins the Heisman Trophy in 2020. Well, Zach didn't win the Heisman, but we've already noted the numbers from 2019 to 2020, an absolutely incredible jump up. And I think that's the best comparison in my opinion.
Okay, so when you look at Burrow, so you don't see compare Zach Wilson to Tua. Just curious what you have to say about that.
Tua's an interesting player because he has got an electric arm that can make a lot of different plays and whatnot. I think that the arm strength's probably similar between the 2 of them. Speaking of Tua and Zach, I think that that's probably the best comparison. Tua is a more mobile quarterback than I think Zach is. And I'm not saying that Zach's not mobile. He scored 10 rushing touchdowns last year for the Cougars, so he can run when he needs to. But Tua is a little bit different quarterback. Obviously, a southpaw being a lefty versus Zach as a right-hander. But I think that Tua, the arm strength is comparable. And then if you want Justin Herbert, just kind of my thoughts on Herbert and Wilson, Herbert's a guy I saw a lot because we're at a Pac-12 market out here with the University of Utah. I've seen Herbert play a lot for the Ducks out here for Oregon. And every time I watched Herbert play at Oregon, I felt like at times he had handcuffs being placed on him. He was being held back or something was happening to him that didn't necessarily unleash him. And there were a lot of people who wondered, okay, who's going to take him with their first-round pick? The Chargers took him, and it took a little while for him to take over. But once he got on the field, he was electric. What Justin Herbert has shown in the pro so far is unlike anything I saw from him at Oregon overall. And in terms of comparisons between the 2, Herbert's I don't know if I'd necessarily compare them because Herbert is such a good athlete overall, just the ability to throw, to run. He's got the size component that Zach doesn't necessarily have. So I still think Burrow is the best comparison in my book, but there are similarities between all 3.
Steve?
Yeah, it's funny going back. When Justin Herbert came out, a lot of Patriots fans were interested in him at the draft time last year. And I'll be the first to admit it. I was not on his bandwagon whatsoever. I wasn't impressed by him. I was like, I don't think he's going to be a good NFL quarterback. Well, I think I missed the boat on that one. But getting back to Zach, and of course, it wouldn't be the first time I was wrong about a player, but getting back to Zach, I don't watch a lot of Pac-12. I'm an SEC guy, so I'm kind of biased in that aspect. But just watching the tape of him, and people were raving about him all year, and seeing some of the highlights, he kind of reminds me of Baker Mayfield. I don't know how you feel about that, but the way the kind of way they play the game and how they approach it, I was thinking he reminds me of Baker Mayfield, and that's not a bad comparison because I think Baker is hitting his stride now.
Yeah, and a little bit. They're both a little undersized. I know we all know that the ideal quarterback is 6'4", 6'5", 230 pounds. Well, Baker and Zach Wilson, he's 6'2", 210. So not necessarily a small guy, but I actually really like that comparison, Steve. I've had some other people who've mentioned Baker Mayfield to me. I actually think it's a really good comparison, especially in the way they attack the game in terms of their swagger that they play with, the attitude they play with on the field. I think there's some comparisons on that front as well.
I love that. I mean, I like that quarterbacks have that, because you have to have that mentality. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to process out, hey, so what? I just threw a pick. I'm going to go down and throw a touchdown the next time we get the ball in our hands. And I love that attitude. That's why I think Baker Mayfield is going to be really, really good in this league, and he's starting to hit his stride now. So
listen, there's no crime in not winning the Heisman Trophy, and if you think there is, don't tell that to Troy Aikman. He did pretty well without it. I'm sure we can ramble off a bunch of non-Heisman Trophy quarterbacks that had good careers.
Yeah, just look back at BYU history. Jim McMahon finished third in the Heisman Trophy voting. I believe Steve Young was third as well. McMahon might finish second. Mark Wilson was a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. None of them won it until Ty Detmer. So, yeah, I'm with you there on that.
Come on, Troy Aikman had a pretty good career.
Yeah.
When was the last time Jerry Jones with Jimmy Johnson won a Super Bowl? Ever heard of Troy Aikman, by the way? If you haven't, okay, Green Bay Packers have. They don't like him anyways, but Troy's a Hall of Fame quarterback. So I think in some respects they did him a favor not winning the Heisman Trophy, Zach Wilson, because now you have a lot of.
Well, yeah, you're a Michigan Detroit guy, so. I mean, look what they did to Michigan, Tom Brady. They kept trying to replace him.
Yeah, well, that's true.
The next great guy, they were always trying to replace him. And I think that's what drove him to become the pro he did. So,
the Heisman Trophy to me has always been an award for running backs and quarterbacks. For the most part, very few non-playmakers get it. It's not to say that they don't, but we all know full well the nature of that award. It's more glamour, I guess, when you're in that community you are. But, Desmond Howard, Charles Woodson, they were non-quarterbacks, and they did pretty well. So, Zach Wilson, you may be lacking the hardware and the vote, but at least you don't have to worry about the curse of the Heisman by any stretch. So, when we look at some of the quarterbacks in this class with Zach Wilson, I'll bring up a few of the main ones. We talked about Trey Lance. I think it was North Dakota State, same place as Carson Wentz. Justin Fields out of Ohio State. And, of course, Mac Jones. Well, many of them I think are penciling to go third. But now I hear that the 49ers aren't totally sure unless they're doing a great poker face to hide this pick. So let's look at each of these three quarterbacks since we've got, as it stands right now, we got Trevor Lawrence going number one. And unless the New York Jets change their mind with Zach Wilson, which I don't see happening, okay, let's assess the other three.
Well, I can tell you this much. I don't know how many of you guys can see this on my video. There's a picture up behind me there. You can probably read that. It says The Cat. I am an unabashed San Francisco 49ers fan, and I can tell you this much. If they pick Mac Jones, I'm going to be apoplectic about it. I don't get why you'd move up to number 3 to take Mac Jones. And
right.
I may be dead wrong about that. I am a huge fan of Justin Fields. I think Justin Fields has all the ability to be an elite NFL quarterback. Size, speed, arm strength, just has everything that screams to me future all-pro, Pro Bowl caliber quarterback year in and year out. Trey Lance is such an enigma to me just due to the lack of reps we saw. I didn't see him playing a lot of games during his time with North Dakota State, but the physical tools appear to be there. He's got the size and speed and the arm strength based on what you saw from his pro day. But if you of the other three, my guy is Justin Fields, but we'll find out who lays out where.
Yeah, I don't get all of the – there's a lot of bad feeling about Justin Fields, and I haven't seen anything – on the field or off of it with this kid that would lead me to believe that he can't play well in the NFL. I mean, I keep hearing people say, oh, man, he's not, going to be a good NFL quarterback. What would lead people to believe that? I mean, I haven't seen it. I think he's incredible. And, I know a lot of people are really, really down on him. I just don't get it.
Yeah, that makes three of us. I mean, like I said, I was sold on Zach Wilson after he dismantled the Central Florida Knights. So if we're sharing this broadcast of Central Florida Knights, okay, no, I don't need a bulletproof vest to go up to Orlando. I'm just not going to go there unless I go to Disney World and nobody will care anyways, or Epcot Center. But that's beside the point.
Hey, the war on I-4, man. That's a legit rivalry.
Well, you better believe I'm a USF Bull proud. I'm only wearing an FAU hat because that's where I came in contact with you. And I do cover the Owls, and we produce some good players there. Alfred Morris, to name a few. So there have been some pretty good Owls that have come out of there. But, but when I look at these five quarterbacks, my grade on them is I got to go Lawrence first. I love his body of work at Clemson, coached up well by Dabo Sweeney. Okay, there. I like Zach Wilson because he does have some incredible tools. He's mobile enough, and he certainly has a fine thrower, and he definitely went ahead and showed what he is. I would be more inclined to go with Justin Fields at Ohio State third. The quality of the competition, the Big Ten, I think, is a lot better. And let alone the fact that he transferred, from Georgia to go to Ohio State. So you had a taste of SEC/Big Ten. And then, I don't know, I may probably put Mac Jones fourth because he's a prototypical pro type of quarterback. And the reason why I would go fourth with Mac Jones comes from Alabama, well coached under Nick Saban. Got to give him his due there. And I think the thing is, when you look at Trey Lance, reminds me a little bit of Mitchell Trubisky, where you have a small sample size. Is it a risk versus reward? And I think you kind of wonder about that.
Well, when it comes to Trey Lance, I think a lot of people look at, because they're kind of play a lesser schedule. But I mean, you look at his 2019 season. I mean, he had 28 touchdowns and 0 interceptions, and then he ran for 1,400 yards or 1,100 yards and 14 touchdowns. I mean, the tools are all there. He reminds me of a young Cam Newton. And when I said that on the air in Boston, oh my God, they wanted to kill me because Cam Newton isn't very popular right now with the Patriots fans. But he does remind me a little bit of a Cam Newton. I think just because of he didn't play much in 2020, and they played a lesser schedule a little bit at North Dakota State, but I think he's got all the tools. I still would put Fields above him. And again, when you're talking to Mac Jones, the interesting thing about Mac Jones is you look at the supporting cast he had at Alabama, and most any NFL team, it's going to be a step back in terms of his supporting cast around him. I mean, because you can't fault him for the guys he had around him, but I mean, Devonta Smith,
Jalen Waddle.
Yes, Jalen Waddle. I mean, I thought Waddle was really their number one wide receiver.
Well, he
last
was.
year.
Yeah, he was
until he got hurt.
Yeah,
and I know a lot of people are talking about taking Smith first. I don't think you could go wrong taking either one of those wide receivers, but if it was me, I'd take Waddle first. But again, I don't think any of these guys are bad quarterbacks. I think it's all going to depend on where they go and the system that they're put in, and if they're a fit for that. I think there's certain teams that Mac Jones would work out well. Maybe San Francisco's one of those. But again, like you, Jake, would he have been there when they picked? Did they need to move up to 3 to take him? I don't know. I have my doubts about that. That's the only thing that holds me back. I know they were really high on Mac Jones, but why move up to 3 unless they really love this kid and they'll don't want to risk losing him.
Well, they pushed all their chips in. They traded multiple first-round picks over the next couple of years beyond this year to move up to that spot. they got to nail this pick, and we're going to find out. I don't want to come off as being a Mac Jones hater because I think he's an absolutely brilliant quarterback. You mentioned the fact that his surrounding cast, Najee Harris, Jalen Waddle, Devontae Smith, all going to be first-round picks. Landon Dickerson, his center, would be a first-round pick had he not blown out his knee last year. There's just so much talent around him. It's the question, okay, how much better was he made because of that supporting cast around him versus how much better did he make them? And man, I don't know. But what I saw from sorry, Steve, just one thing with the Justin Fields situation, what he did against Clemson with allegedly broken ribs, bruised at the very best, just a legendary performance. It showed everything I needed to see from him to make me think this guy can succeed in the NFL.
Yeah, and with Mac Jones, you made a great point. I mean, you look down the field and there's, Devonta Smith and Jalen Waddle, and then, if they start double teaming both of those, you hand it off to Najee Harris, and he was pretty good out of the backfield too. I mean, but I give Mac Jones a lot of credit. He throws a beautiful ball, and I think that, he's on target. He knows how to read the field. It's just, if I'm that number 3 pick, I'm going Justin Fields. No offense to either of the other guys. I just think he's the guy. I really do.
Yeah, I believe that I would take Justin Fields as well, but, I'm not. But you got to remember one thing. Kyle Shanahan knows he's got to get it right. Forget about the snafu that he was when he was the offensive coordinator with the Atlanta Falcons, and then they lost in that game, even though he'll never live that one down. Forget about the going into the Super Bowl, he ended up losing that one too. Forget about those. You need to nail this pick. So my thing I'm curious about is, we know that Zach Wilson will probably do a lot of losing in New York because he does not have a very good supporting cast around him, which is why the Jets are picking number 2. Can he handle that environment doing a lot of losing in a town like that? Because losing is tough.
Okay, so one thing I can express to you guys on this is he came to BYU when they were coming off their worst season in almost 40 years. They went 4-9 in 2017. They convinced him to come down there and be the guy who they thought could turn things around. And he took a leap of faith because BYU, I'm not going to lie, they went 4-9 in 2017, guys. I have watched a lot of BYU football in my life, and that was by far the worst team I have seen in my lifetime. They were awful. They should not have even won 4 games, in my opinion. He took a massive leap of faith because he had opportunities late in that process. Programs like Syracuse, Iowa State came in late and tried to get him to move off of his commitment to BYU. He stuck with the Cougars. He wanted to stay a little closer to home, obviously just up the road in Draper, which is about a 30-minute drive from Provo. But he came to BYU coming off one of their worst years ever and helped them really turn things around. They went 7-6 in back-to-back years. There were some fans who said, okay, well, they could have done better in 2019. Okay, I get that. But he was hurt midway through the year, all that stuff. But then I think 2020 was the payoff year of what he expected to do with the Cougars. They went 11-1. The rebuild was complete in 3 years. I honestly think he's going to go to the Jets thinking, okay, we got a new coach, we got a new regime. They're trying to rebuild this. I'm going to do the exact same thing I did at BYU, just at the NFL level.
But so you're saying he's embracing the challenge, but the only intangible factor that he has is that media market will eat you up alive.
See, that's the part about this. There's just a factor of this fan base is as restless as any out there. And I can tell you guys this much: BYU's fan base is rabid. They are as rabid as they come. There are BYU fans literally worldwide. I have a guy, just to give you an example of how the reach of BYU fandom. I know a guy who listens to my podcast that I do covering BYU. He listens to it from a sailboat in the Philippines. He's retired sailing around the Philippines on his sailboat, and he listens to my podcast. That's how global the BYU fan base goes. And there's a lot of pressure being the man in Provo, Utah, with just the legendary quarterbacks who have come through this program. The Jets, yes, that media market, the fan base, absolutely. They're all going to, if you have a bad game, they're going to rip you. I think Zach Wilson, in a way, relishes this opportunity because he's done it once before at BYU, and I think he thinks he can do it again with the Jets.
Even though the media market is 1/10 of the size, it doesn't make any difference, probably, right?
I think he's a kid, based on what I understand of him and his interactions with the media, he was always professional, always courteous. There were media people who would hit him with a pretty hard-hitting question. He'd kind of look at him for a second, take a minute, compose himself, and give him a very thoughtful answer. Not much rattles this kid. It's very impressive considering how young he is. He's a true junior. He's only 21 years old. This is still a very young man. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does. That media market, it's about as tough as there is in the NFL, maybe the toughest in the NFL. But I'm convinced that Zach is a part of him that thinks, okay, I did this once before, I will do it again.
Well, let's talk about some tough media markets, and I want to talk about some of the highest drafted players from BYU since 1967, since I have a few interesting names.
Okay.
Yeah. I definitely don't believe that New York is number one. I also believe that Philadelphia is probably a pretty wicked one, too. Mm-hmm. I have a feeling that Boston is no slouch. I don't know whether LA is as tough of a media market because you got too many surfboards out there and a lot of them.
Yeah, trust me, my wife's from Southern California. I can attest to that fact. There's so much to do in LA that
right.
I don't necessarily know that there's the attention paid to pro sports like it is in other markets.
And in my neck of the woods in Southern Florida, I don't think it's tough here because, again, either you win or they simply don't support. And at this point, the teams have to just do the best they can to get coverage and hope that the PR guys are good enough to go ahead and do it. So when you're dealing with the Sun Belt climate, it's not so bad. But when you get to, I have to say, I might be a little bit biased toward this. The metropolitan Detroit media market's pretty good. They're very good, fair people. Chicago, the same way. So, I'm talking about some of the major cities. And I know Boston probably is demanding as well to a large extent, but nothing like New York. Steve, what do you think?
Oh, no. New York is tough. And Philadelphia, if you've ever been to a sporting event there, it's an experience. I've been to Flyers games. I've been to Eagles games. I've been to Phillies games, and they're all pretty much the same. That's a tough audience there, and that's a tough place to play. Same with New York. Boston, depending on the team, the fans are tough on their sports teams. But Boston's still pretty much a blue collar kind of town.
Right.
If guys put the effort in, fans will appreciate that. It's the entitled type of players they don't like.
I'll never forget a story when I was covering the Phillies in Clearwater, Florida. And, you talk about these Philly fans, the way they travel in Clearwater. I was over at Jack Russell Stadium at the time. And some of the fans got on Von Hayes' case quite a bit. And I decided to go ahead because he was traded for like 6 players. And then, you know what? I decided to pull the tape recorder. Hey, Von, you want to talk? He was really great. But meanwhile, you're talking about a market that Steve Carlton wanted no part of. He wouldn't talk to anybody about giving them silent treatment. So I can appreciate the Philly side. But I think nowadays, okay, you have a lot of markets where, they'll talk or they won't. Then again, with Zoom calls, who knows who's talking anymore, but that'll be for another show. Well, when you talk about the fact that you have a rabid BYU fan base, we're going to talk about some of the highest drafted players from BYU since 1967. I'm going to read off the ones. And now when Zach Wilson gets taken second overall, he will be the all-time highest one. So Ezekiel Ansah, defensive end for the Detroit Lions, was drafted 2013, the 5th overall pick. We know that Jim McMahon made out pretty well in 1982, 5th overall pick, but went to the Bears. Now, we talked about Sean Knight, defensive tackle in 1987, number 1, 11th overall. You say that he didn't work out so well at all, did he?
Yeah, only 3 years in the NFL, considered one of the bigger busts in BYU draft history. Played 3 seasons for 3 different NFL franchises, and that was it. So yeah, if you're that highly picked, you shouldn't be lasting just 3 seasons and playing for 3 different franchises in those seasons.
What's your assessment of Ezekiel Ansah?
So he's known out here by Ziggy. That's what his nickname was out here when he played. He had an absolutely incredible story. This is a guy, and you guys will laugh. He's from Ghana, Africa. He's 6'6", 270 pounds, and probably hadn't lifted a weight in his life, but he actually dreamed of playing collegiate basketball. He was a member of the LDS faith, the Mormon faith that runs BYU out here, decided he would try and walk on to the BYU basketball program as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Got cut twice from the basketball program after trying out twice there. Then decided, you know what? Maybe I'll try track. Let me remind you guys, 6'6", like 250, 270 pounds. He was very, very fast. The track coaches actually liked his speed, but in his first official race, he came out of the starting blocks, knocked the guy in the left lane out of his lane. His next step knocked the guy to his right out of his lane. He was disqualified at that point. So, true story, and I've heard this from multiple people, the track and field sprint coach took Ziggy literally by the hand, dragged him down to the football offices at Brigham Young University, walked into then head coach Bronco Mendenhall's office and said, "Hey, I think you may want to meet this guy." Ziggy was only and he legitimately, he had never put on football pads before. You guys know Kyle Van Noy. I know, Steve, you're probably very familiar with KVN.
Oh, yeah.
Even you, Steve, you would know about him with the Miami Dolphins. Well, Kyle Van Noy had to teach him how to put football pads on. He had no clue on what he was doing. He ended up being a part-time starter finally as a senior in college. His physical gifts, he went to the Senior Bowl, and the Lions that year were coaching the Senior Bowl, fell in love with him, and they picked him with that 5th overall pick. It's one of those stories that should be made into a movie, honestly, just because of his story coming from Ghana, trying out for the basketball team, going to the track team, then being dragged to the football offices, and then ends up being the 5th overall pick and has made plenty of money in his NFL career. The biggest issue for him lately has been staying healthy in the NFL. That's been his biggest bugaboo.
Well, Kyle Van Noy, I believe, was also taken by the Lions as well. So
correct. Before he got traded to the Patriots, correct.
Well, everybody gets traded from the Lions to the Patriots. That cycle, sometimes they go, sometimes they don't. The only one that didn't want to go there was Matt Stafford. A couple other players that come to mind, John Tate, tackle, who got drafted by Kansas City in 1999, 14th pick overall, obviously round 1. And then, of course, we alluded to Mark Wilson earlier, the quarterback. Went to the Oakland Raiders 1980 when they were good, okay? And he was the 15th overall. So you got 5 at least great players at BYU, and it looks like 4 of the 5 that I've talked about have turned out well, and including some of the other ones. And for those people that want to talk about BYU basketball, ever heard of Danny Ainge? Okay, Danny Ainge. And Steve ought to know. I mean, geez, old Pete, he's out in the New England area. Yep. With the Celtics, so
Jimmer for that as well. Many people remember Jimmer as well. So
yeah, well, maybe they want to remember him, maybe they don't. But he hasn't had as good of a year as career. But he was pretty heralded coming out. So So, what do you want to tell to our listeners, Jacob, about Zach Wilson?
Man, the biggest thing about Zach is I think this is a guy that's going to impress people. He's poised. He never gives a bad answer when asked a question by the media. He has been taught from a very young age that you address everything head on, be smart with your answers. He's guarded, obviously. Every athlete is like that. But this is a young man who is driven to succeed. I think he envisions for himself being a Super Bowl champion at some point. I think that's exactly what he envisions for himself. Whether that's going to be with the New York Jets, who knows? If you do that with the New York Jets, guess what? There's only one other guy who's done it in franchise history, and his name is Joe Namath, and you'll be an all-time legend in that town. But I truly believe that he in his heart of hearts, he believes he can go out and be the answer that the New York Jets need him to be. Whether that comes to fruition, whether that ultimately is what happens, only time will tell. But I am excited to see him finally take this opportunity to go to the pro ranks. I know there were a lot of BYU fans who were hoping and praying that he was going to hold on for one more year and see if he could lead BYU to another stellar season this coming fall. But the writing was on the wall midway through last year. He had to go. He had to take this opportunity. And I think the entirety of BYU fandom out there is going to be right there behind him cheering on the Jets.
Do you know if he has ever spoken to Joe Namath at all whatsoever?
So there was a story put out that he spoke with Chad Pennington, Mark Sanchez, and I believe one other Jets quarterback. I don't think it was Namath, though, but I'll tell you this much. We all know that Joe Namath is still a legendary figure around the NFL. If they haven't talked already, I'll guarantee they'll be talking very shortly after he is drafted by the Jets.
They'll be talking on Thursday night.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's true, Steve. They probably will be. Joe Namath will definitely be keeping an eye on this kid. And like I said, when I saw Zach Wilson, and I know I'm making a lot of friends in Orlando, shred UCF. Oh, it didn't break my heart one bit over at Howard Schnellenberger Field. And I don't think we've done a broadcast since we should pay our respects to Howard Schnellenberger, who obviously built lots of programs. From nothing to what they are. Obviously, turned around the program at the University of Miami, did wonders at Louisville, and of course, FAU, he built it from the ground up. And here, Jake and I are hanging out over at Howard Schnellenberger Field Stadium, whatever you call it. I don't get into the corporate sponsors. Now, they want to pay all three of us a residual. Yeah, you got my attention, but yeah, I really like Zach Wilson. And I got to tell you, I really decided to apply for a credential at the last minute. I wasn't sure if I was going to cover that game, if I was going to be in town. But when I decided to do it, what the heck? And then all of a sudden I got approved, and I'm watching this kid. It's pretty neat to be able to see a guy who you hope will be a great quarterback down the road, because you know what, the NFL, they're always looking for quarterbacks of the future that are legitimate. Not all these hype guys don't turn out to be anything, because if you want to talk about some quarterbacks in past classes, which I think that I've thought about it, let's go review a couple more classes before we go ahead and sign off. But I think in 1999, okay, you had Tim Couch being taken by Cleveland #1. Donovan McNabb had those prove them wrong attitudes out in Philly. We all talked about how tough of a town that was. And Achilles Smith, okay, in Cincinnati, two of those three struggled. Donovan McNabb had the best career of the three. And then in 1971, Jim Plunkett didn't do a bad job in New England, but, got an opportunity with the Raiders to win it all. Archie Manning, we all know how well he did. And I thought Dan Pastorini wasn't too bad either. And we're talking about the 1971 class. Now, when I look at all these guys and where they were drafted, Couch was #1 overall. Donovan McNabb actually was #2 overall. And boy, I got news for you. The Philly fans went ballistic over that one. And Achilles Smith was 3rd in 99. Jim Plunkett was #1 overall, and Archie Manning was #2. And Dan Pastorini #3. So I guess where I'm going with this is we're talking about Zach Wilson being a top 3 pick, and I'm trying to mention other names that are in that top 3 spot, let alone the fact that we already talked about Sam Darnold being #3.
Mm-hmm. Well, see, okay, here's the thing is the metrics out there say that there's probably going to be a bust among this, or 2 busts potentially among these 5 quarterbacks who are going to go in the first round of this year's draft. Just how history has panned out. I think the metrics say there's going to be 1 transcendent star, and I think many of us think that's probably going to be Trevor Lawrence. He seems like the guy best suited to do that. And the other 2 guys will probably be okay quarterbacks, and that's just kind of how NFL history has kind of gone about it. Man, it's going to be interesting. Like I said, I may be having my, I guess we'll call them blue-colored glasses out here with regards to BYU and my belief in Zach Wilson, but there are 5 talented quarterbacks in this class, and it's unfortunate that apparently if you just go on history, and we all know that history says that there's going to be guys who bust in this class. It's unfortunate because I think all 5 of these guys are very, very talented players.
I've always mentioned.
I go back to that '83 class.
Yeah.
Where, the 5 quarterbacks, John Elway, Todd Blackledge, Jim Kelly, Tony Eason, Ken O'Brien, Dan Marino.
Yeah.
So all taken in the first round.
Yeah.
And a couple of them didn't work out, but, talking Jim Kelly, John Elway, Dan Marino.
3 Hall of Famers, same class.
Yeah, not a bad 1983 class.
Wasn't Tony Eason in that class too, if I remember
yes.
right?
Yep. Tony Eason went to New England.
Right. And a lot of people have asked me out there whether they think Joey Harrington was a bust. And my answer to that is I say no. And I'll tell you why I say that. Because he had a lot of coaching staffs and offensive coordinators. And had this man here, it had a coaching staff instead of a lot of coaching staffs, I think Joey's fortunes would have turned around. They thought they could get it right with Steve Mariucci, but when you have an inexperienced guy like Matt Millen as a general manager surrounding it with nothing, that's a recipe for disaster. and we're not going to get into the bust thing, but when we talk about bust, a lot of high heralded busts do occur when you're talking about the quarterback position, which we all know if you don't get it right, it sets you back 3 to 5 years, and you're doing it all over
minimum.
Again.
Yeah, minimum.
And I think that's where the conversation comes full circle. So, anything else you want to add about Zach Wilson?
I just want to express to people, you're going to enjoy this young man. He's a fun kid. He's got a good attitude, a good head on his shoulders. He's got a family who is a ton of fun. His mom is a fireball, by the way. I don't know how many people are on social media. Lisa Wilson, his mom. She's on social media quite a bit. She's a ton of fun, though. She's got a bundle of energy, and she loves her son. I can tell you that much. And he is the first in 4 boys who play football. He has 2 brothers who are currently still at BYU, who are both linebackers. But apparently the 4th brother, the youngest brother in the family, is a quarterback just like Zach Wilson. So keep an eye out for the Wilson family. There might be another guy coming up through the ranks eventually.
Steve?
Awesome stuff, Jake. I appreciate that. That was it was a lot of fun talking about him. I think we learned a lot more about him now for somebody who watched them all the time. Because, a lot of times this time of year we get hung up on highlight reels, and that doesn't always tell the story of a person. It doesn't tell you what makes them tick, if you're just looking at highlight reels. So that was great stuff, man.
All right, well, just so everybody knows, this is the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth. Tonight, my co-hosts are Jake Hatch, and Steve Balestrieri. You're watching this through YouTube.com. Okay, so for all you folks out there, please subscribe to the South Florida Tribune YouTube channel, and you'll be able to get all of our broadcasts on it. So if you want to know how to do it, go to YouTube.com, look up South Florida Tribune, and hit the subscribe button. I believe you have to have a Gmail account, or I don't know if you do, but nevertheless, okay, please subscribe. Without you folks subscribing, obviously, we want to make sure we grow this as much as we can. If you want to hear the audio version of this broadcast, you can do so with Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Google Podcasts as well. So you get the audio version of it as well as the visual. And I think that, like I said before, Jake and I talked about doing this in December, and I'm glad that we picked the right time to do it just before the draft, because we want to make sure you watch this video and our broadcast so you get the best insight possible about the next potential superstar quarterback. And I don't, when I say video, they always say in the visual part of what we're here to do. We're here to give it to you, okay?
That's the truth, though. That's right there.
Yeah, we do. So glad to have everybody joining us tonight on this edition of the Sports Exchange. My name is Scott Morganroth, the Motor City Madmouth. And again, glad to be joined by Jake Hatch and Steve Balestrieri. So, guys, it's been a pleasure doing this broadcast with you, and we look forward to hopefully bringing we'll try to do this act again maybe in a few months when we see a little bit more progress with Zach Wilson. I wouldn't mind doing this again. Would you?
Oh, happy to do it. Anytime you guys need me, you guys know how to get a hold of me.
Well, I always try to find dynamic trios, and I feel we did a pretty good job tonight. So, and I always look forward to try to keep it fresh and make sure that we do what we've got to do. And, who knows? I can tell you like to talk a lot of football anyways, right, Jake?
It's my life, man. I do sports radio, my day job, podcasting on the side. Sports is my life, man. I love it. I can't get enough.
So what do you think, Steve? Do you think this guy deserves to come back to talk general football?
Oh, absolutely. Once we start getting a dose of Zach in a gangrene uniform, we'll have to have Jake back on.
Well, I can tell you this much. There's BYU fans out there who are currently going Z-A-C-H, Zach. It's already happening now here in Utah.
Well, I'll tell you what. You go out there and spread this broadcast to all your BYU people out there, because we want to make sure that they realize that we want to not only promote Zach Wilson, but I have been a very strong admirer of BYU football. Although I have to tell you, I wasn't overly thrilled many years ago when they beat the Michigan Wolverines in the national championship.
I was gonna say, is 1984 gonna stick in your craw a little bit?
Well, no, it sticks in my craw a lot of it. I'm trying to remember who was the quarterback on that team.
Well, Jim well, on the Michigan side of things, it was Jim Harbaugh. BYU side, it was Robbie Bosco.
So Robbie Bosco outdoes Jim Harbaugh. My goodness. The legend continues.
Yep.
Maybe the next time I bring you back on, I'll bring my Michigan Wolverines hat on instead.
Let's
you
do
can rub
it.
it into me. I got no problem with it. I love U of M. I was born and raised with the Wolverines. So. But meanwhile, if it weren't for Florida Atlantic University and that stadium, I wouldn't be able to meet you. So FAU is a beautiful thing. So meanwhile, on behalf of Jake Hatch and Steve Balestrieri, my name is Scott Morganroth. Thanking you for joining us on this edition of the Sports Exchange. And until the next time, thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.